2 minutes. That was exactly how long it took someone to transform a mundane situation into something I couldn't get out of my head. I was driving down the mountain west, off the main interstates, hauling a clean load of packaged plastic parts, the kind that don't attract attention and don't give anyone a second glance. The route had been planned to avoid heavy traffic and save fuel, taking stretches of state highway between southern Idaho and northern Utah. The kind of road that seems wide enough to make you feel safe and empty enough to remind you that, if something goes wrong, there's no audience. The asphalt is good, the signage is simple, the horizon has mountains on both sides, and a line of cold sky that makes everything look like dawn, even when it isn't yet. My internal clock was already acting strangely. I'd slept enough to drive, but not enough to be fully recovered. When you drive like that, your mind becomes too practical. You stop arguing with yourself and just solve, as if each decision were a risk assessment spreadsheet. A warning light appeared on the dashboard and disappeared quickly. The horse's tire pressure was slightly out of range. It wasn't an alarm, just that kind of warning that makes you think for a second. I knew the sensor could vary with temperature, but I also knew that ignoring a warning like that on an empty road was asking to lose an entire night stranded on the side of the road later. The shoulder in that stretch was generous, almost an extra lane, and the terrain alongside was hard gravel. There were no farm entrances, no service signs, no city lights. It was just the highway and emptiness. I signaled, slowed down, pulled over, and left the engine idling. The idea was simple. Get out, glance at the tire, touch the tread, check if anything was stuck, get back in. 2 minutes. I didn't even turn off the truck. I didn't even think about locking the door. It was automatic, as if braking was something only done by people who were going to stay longer. The air outside had that dry smell of pine and coal dust. The wind was blowing from the side and making a thin sound on the mirror. I walked over to the side of the horse, crouched down, ran my hand over the tire. Felt the rubber was firm and the temperature was normal. No cuts, no objects. The headlight beam hit the asphalt diagonally, and I could see that the tire wasn't actually deflating. I stood up and looked ahead reflexively. No car was coming. I looked back. Nothing. A silence so pure you could hear the ticking of the engine. In practice, that should have been reassuring. In my stomach, it felt the opposite. It was at that moment that a small detail appeared and disappeared. A brief glint, like a reflection on the opposite side of the track, at the edge of the gravel. I blinked and it was gone. It might have been mica on the ground. It might have been my own headlight hitting an old sign. But when you're alone, anything that looks like an eye becomes a thought. I rushed back to the cabin, more annoyed at the wasted time than worried about the tire. When I grabbed the handle, the door swayed too slightly. It wasn't open, but it didn't seem properly closed either. I closed it again and climbed back up. The interior was the same. Same smell, same seat, my cup in the same place. But I felt something that's hard to explain. The cabin had an air of recent movement, like when you enter a room and realize someone just left. I tried to attribute it to the wind, my own tiredness, the noise of the road that disappears when you pull over. I got back on the track and sped up, trying to regain my rhythm. The first few kilometers were normal, but the feeling stuck in the back of my mind. It wasn't panic. It was a silly vigilance, as if I were waiting for confirmation, any confirmation at all, to justify the discomfort. A little later, I noticed that the driver's side window deflector was a millimeter out of alignment with how I always leave it. It wasn't something you could see right away, but I adjusted every day because of the wind. I pressed it with my finger and it snapped back into place with a minimal click. That should have ended the matter. Instead, it raised a question. Why had it come loose? Further on, one of the interior courtesy lights flickered as I drove over a more uneven section of road. It wasn't a new electrical fault. It was a vibration contact, something I'd seen before. Even so, I looked at the door again, as if the cabin itself was trying to draw attention to the wrong place. The road began to descend into a valley, and the temperature dropped. The tire pressure warning light didn't come back on, as I had expected. What did come back was the feeling that I had been measured. Not observed from afar, but measured in time, in habit, in the way I did something simple. I searched the rearview mirror for any light. Nothing. I looked in the convex mirror for any dark spot. Nothing. The highway was a tube of shadow with the lane markings reflecting under the headlights, and the mountains became featureless walls. I found myself looking more at the mirrors than at the road, which is a mistake in itself. When you try to deny an idea, you give it form. I did the opposite, trying to prove to myself that it was just routine. I mentally recited what I had done. I pulled over, got out, touched the tire, went back. 2 minutes. Nothing can happen in 2 minutes. But the truth is that two things happen very well in that time. Someone tests a door, and someone makes a decision. I passed a small exit with no gas station, just a city sign and a U-turn. I didn't stop. I continued until I found a well-lit rest area, one of those with a bathroom and 2 or 3 parking spaces for trucks. It wasn't big, but it had enough light to take the road out of absolute darkness. I needed coffee, and above all, I needed to get rid of that feeling in my body. I parked in reverse, aligned the truck, pulled the parking brake, and this time, locked the door before getting out, even though the engine was still running. I did it quickly, as if I were ashamed of myself for remembering. The place smelled of damp concrete and travel waste, and the white light made everything seem shallow. I went into the bathroom, washed my face, drank some water, went back to the truck with the coffee still on my mind and the same feeling in my chest. The difference was that now I had light and time to check. It wasn't fear of being robbed. It was fear of being prepared for something I couldn't yet see. I climbed into the cab and looked first at what nobody else looks at. The side of the door, the hinge, the rubber seal, the gap between the metal sheet and the frame. I didn't do this like a movie investigation. I did it like a driver who's seen people improvise locks with anything and knows where those attempts begin. That's when I saw it. A black plastic cable tie, the kind used to secure cables, was attached to the inside hinge. Not whole. Cut in half with the rounded end showing like a small tooth. It was positioned in a way that didn't interfere with closing the door and didn't make any noise. It was just a discreet marker, right where you never touch it. My first reaction was to look for a stupid explanation. Maybe it was something from maintenance. Maybe it had fallen from some cable harness. But I know my truck. I clean that area when I wash the inside, because road dust sticks there. There was no way it could have been there before without me seeing it, and there was no way it could have appeared on its own. I pulled the clamp with my fingernail, but it didn't come loose easily. It was intentionally fastened. When I forced it, it gave way and came off, leaving a tiny mark in the paint. And right below, on the metal step, there was a new scratch. A thin scrape that cut through the old dust at an angle my foot can't make. Old dust is uniform. A new scratch looks like a signature. I ran my finger along the scratch and felt a different kind of sand. Coarser, like roadside gravel, not like gas station dust. The sum of the things was too small to become proof and too large to be a coincidence. I held the piece of plastic in my hand, looking at it as if it were a wordless note. At that same moment, the 2-minute stop took on a different form. It wasn't about the tire. It wasn't about the sensor. It was about access. Someone had gotten close enough to touch my door, worked there without any visible hurry, did something small, and left before I returned. I didn't see anyone because I wasn't looking in the right place. I was looking at the tire. I tried to reconstruct the usefulness of that. A marker can serve several purposes. It can be used to identify a specific vehicle. It can be used to know if you lock your car or not. It can be used to test if you notice details. It can be used to mark a truck with a clean load, a truck driven by a distracted driver, or a truck that stops alone on an empty shoulder. What chilled me wasn't the cable tie itself. It was the level of calm. Whoever does that isn't improvising. Whoever improvises breaks in, takes what they can, and leaves. Whoever marks their target chooses the moment, chooses the habit, chooses the target. And when they mark their target, they almost always come back. I opened the door and inspected the rubber seal from the inside, looking for the kind of thing you only see with the light on. A stuck wire, tape, a tool mark. Near the bottom corner was a thin, clear fiber that wasn't from my clothing and wasn't from the upholstery. I pulled on it and it snapped easily, as if it had been scraped off someone's glove or sleeve. It wasn't a lab clue. It was just another confirmation of contact. I left the rest area without finishing my coffee. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't speed off like I was running away. I only got back on the road with the cab locked and a new rule in my head. No empty shoulder is neutral. I drove a few more dozen miles and stopped at a larger gas station with visible traffic and cameras. I parked near other trucks under real light and did a complete walk around the area. I looked for more markers, more plastic, more tape, anything out of the ordinary. I didn't find anything, which didn't help, because when you find one, you start imagining the ones you didn't find. On the asphalt of the gas station near a trash can, I saw a piece of a black cable tie that had been stepped on, cut in the same way mine had been. It wasn't possible to say for sure if it was the same type of marking, because cable ties are everywhere. The cut was too clean and the piece was there where nobody uses cable ties for anything. I didn't pick it up. On that stretch from Idaho to Utah, I spent the rest of the night driving as if the truck were slightly larger than it was, as if someone could be too close in any darkness. Fatigue turned into artificial alertness, and artificial alertness turns into burnout. When the sun began to rise behind the mountains, I had already made too many decisions. I hadn't lost cargo, I hadn't lost money, I hadn't really lost time. What I lost was the feeling that an empty road is restful. I learned that emptiness is also opportunity. After that night, I stopped treating 2 minutes as a small thing. If I need to pull over, I lock the door. If I need to get out, I look around before touching the truck. If I need to resolve something quickly, I force myself to spend an extra 30 seconds doing it the right way. The cable tie was gone, but the thought remained. And the worst thought wasn't about what someone could have done. It was about what someone has chosen not to do yet. If you're enjoying the stories, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment. It really helps the channel. Let's get to the next story. The asphalt seemed clean enough for me to proceed, but that dark patch across the right lane forced me to make a choice in less than a second. On the dashboard, everything's perfect. Pressure, temperature, route, time. The kind of early morning when the truck becomes a metronome and your head goes into autopilot mode. But to autopilot is when you stop questioning the obvious. I-40 cut through the desert like a line without context. Spaced out signage, wide shoulder, no city lights, cold, low sky. Behind me, nothing fixed. Ahead, nothing worth mentioning. I was carrying boxes of automotive components to a warehouse on the New Mexico side. Dry cargo, light, easy. The object on the road didn't seem like a threat. It looked like trash. A piece of tire, a scrap of rubber, maybe a plastic bumper. Small enough that many drivers wouldn't even change course. Big enough for me to imagine a hose ripped off by the impact and a worse situation further ahead. I slowed down, signaled, and pulled over to the shoulder without thinking twice. The word that governed the decision was simple. Fast. Engine on, headlights on, hazard lights flashing. No ritual, no lap around the truck, no dark check. Get out. Remove the obstacle. Get back in. 30 seconds and life is back to normal. The air outside felt drier than inside the cabin. The silence was clean, almost aggressive, broken only by the idling diesel engine and the regular click of the hazard lights reflecting off the asphalt. The piece was made of rubber, plain and simple. Old, flat, weightless. I dragged it out of the way and didn't even need to look around to feel that the time outside had become too long for such a small gesture. I walked back towards the truck, and before reaching the door, I realized the first thing that was wrong. My own certainty had vanished. Nothing in the scene had changed. Still, the passenger side compartment looked different, like when you come home and know someone's been messing with something but can't quite put your finger on what. I know that door like I know the brake pedal. The metal latch always tilts slightly downwards when I close it, out of habit, unintentionally. That morning it was level, perfectly horizontal, as if someone had used a spirit level to adjust it. I stopped, my hand in the air. I looked around. The shoulder of the road was empty. The desert was empty. The road was empty. Just my truck, tall and gleaming, and me, small on the outside. I opened the compartment, Emergency triangles, chains, gloves, a flashlight, tape, a basic kit. Everything in order, as if no one had touched it. I closed it. The latch returned to the horizontal position on its own, too smoothly. I tried to convince myself that I had closed it that way myself. I went upstairs, sat down, and continued on. 10 minutes later, the radio seemed too quiet. I don't change stations on that route. I don't adjust the volume without reason. Even so, I had to turn the knob 2 clicks to hear what had previously been comfortable. 2 clicks isn't much, but it's the kind of not much that betrays interference. I looked in the left rearview mirror. Nothing. Right. Nothing. Convex mirror. Nothing. Even so, the feeling that something had happened in those seconds was greater than the road itself. I started to rewind time. Door opening. Steps to the object. Dragging, turning, going back. 20 seconds, 30? Enough time for someone to emerge from the shadows behind the trailer and touch the latch with their fingertip. Enough time to test the cabin door. Enough time to touch the radio. Enough time to prove that I got off too fast. The I-40 has shoulders that look wide, but offer no visibility. The uneven terrain creates pockets where a low car gets hidden, and the trailer becomes a wall. If someone were parked behind my vehicle, I wouldn't see them until it was too late. At that point, I realized a simple mistake. I hadn't looked behind the trailer before getting out. I hadn't made the basic checking move. I had seen a problem and rushed to fix it. The next large gas station appeared on the GPS as a useful point, a place where I could rest and, mainly, examine the truck in real light. I endured another 40 minutes with a rigid posture, no music, no distractions, just my eyes alternating between the road and the mirrors. When I entered the illuminated courtyard, I felt immediate relief, and that also irritated me. Relief too soon is like letting your guard down because there's a camera, as if a camera could stop someone from doing what they've already planned. I parked away from the pumps and got out again, this time with controlled haste. I went straight to the side compartment. Under the bright light of the lamppost, I saw what the darkness had hidden, a shoe print in the paint near the top edge of the door. It wasn't an old scratch, it wasn't road grime. It was a recent oval, displaced dust in the shape of a sneaker. Someone had used that compartment as a step. I looked up at the side of the cabin. The rubber seal on the door had an uneven sheen, as if fingers had been running over it. I touched it and felt the surface was smoother in a specific area. The doorknob looked normal from the outside, but the metal was cold in a way my touch couldn't explain. Cold as if it had been touched recently by someone who wasn't me. I went back inside and examined the radio. There was no way to prove that the volume had been altered. There was no way to prove anything. That was precisely the problem. It was an event without documentation. I went to the driver's side, got out, and looked at the step. The dust I let accumulate had a thin interruption, a horizontal scratch, as if a shoe had scraped there and come off. A short, discreet, almost polite mark. Nothing was missing. No seals broken, no locks forced, no tools stolen. And that's when my thinking turned ugly. If nothing was lacking, then the objective wasn't theft. It was learning. I mentally returned to the piece of rubber, too small to be a significant accident, large enough to capture my attention, positioned at an angle where I wouldn't see anyone hiding behind the trailer. The piece had offered me a moral justification for stopping. I was clearing the road, being useful, avoiding risk. The justification given was my vulnerability. Because I didn't stop like someone who fears danger. I stopped like someone who wants to resolve this quickly and get back to driving. And those who live off human opportunism don't need strength. They just need that urgency. I stood in the truck stop's yard for a few minutes watching other truckers come and go, talk, laugh. Normal people. But my body insisted on interpreting each step as potential, not out of paranoia, out of a broken pattern. Stories about cargo theft always focus on the moment it all happens. The seal is broken, the forced entry is made, the shock is felt. There was no shock there, just a silent warning. I tried to imagine how someone could do that without being seen. The answer was simple. They didn't need to be seen. They just needed to be in the right place before I stopped. They just needed to wait for me to get off. They just needed to touch the ground and return to the shade. There was no persecution, only preparation. I drove around the entire truck slowly, looking under the trailer, searching for signs of people hiding, looking for loose cables, looking for nothing. Nothing is always the most dangerous part, because it leaves room for your mind to fill with possibilities. When I returned to the cabin, I didn't leave immediately. I adjusted everything with excessive care: locks, mirrors, compartment lock, alarm, interior light. Things I should always do, but that morning I only did after the opportunity had already presented itself. I left the gas station and continued along I-40 with the feeling of being behind someone. Not behind in my route, behind in my reading of the game. At each mile marker, I found myself looking at the shoulder of the road, trying to identify spots where I could stop myself if I wanted to provoke someone. I saw several. Areas that were too wide. Stretches with slight curves that obscured the approach. Places where the lack of traffic creates a false sense of security. The worst part was realizing that I had chosen exactly one of those. At dawn, the tension didn't go away. It just shifted. Instead of fear of the dark, it became fear of habit. If someone had tested my haste once, they could test it again. They could place another object. They could wait for another gesture from me. They could learn that I'm the type who solves things quickly and moves on. The thought that really struck me was the simplest one. I had taught about myself in 30 seconds. I taught him that I leave the engine running. I taught him that I get out of the trailer without looking back. I taught him that I place too much trust in the absence of headlights. I taught him that I return to the cabin without doing an immediate inspection. The side compartment wasn't the target. It was the instrument. The leveled lock, the sole mark, the radio volume, everything served to gauge my perception and reaction time. If I didn't notice, I'd be the perfect type. If I noticed, I would still be the type that's easily manipulated, because now I would be expecting a big event and could be driven by anxiety. I changed my routine during that same trip. I only stopped in well-lit and busy places. If something appeared on the road and didn't seem capable of knocking down an axle, I kept going. If it was large, I looked for the next safe spot, even if it meant carrying the risk for a few kilometers. It wasn't courage, it was belated discipline. Days later, already in another state, I went to open that compartment to get gloves and noticed something I hadn't seen in the early morning. A small scratch on the inner edge where the key shouldn't touch. A short, clean scratch, as if someone had tested a thin blade to see if the door would give way without chipping the paint. There I became certain of what had previously only been a suspicion. They didn't want my cargo that night. They wanted to know if they could. They wanted to know if I was creating the opportunity on my own. I think about this whenever I see anything on the road in an empty stretch. The right decision isn't always the quickest one, and the road, when it's too quiet, is usually full of people who live by quick decisions. The piece of rubber was just the invitation. The opportunity was for me to accept. That day I also started marking my own locks. A discreet line with an ink pen, invisible to anyone not looking, but obvious to me. If the line is out of place, I know someone touched it. I preferred to seem overbearing than to offer 30 free seconds to a stranger again. The trailer wasn't aligned, but it didn't show up in the mirror. I only realized it when I heard the first creak of the dock rubber bending more than it should. I was still backing up, light foot on the brake, when I felt the wrong vibration travel up the steering wheel and back up the seat. It wasn't a jolt, it was a twist. The kind of resistance that happens when the rear end hits the wrong spot and the weight starts shifting off center. The lane was too narrow to fix later. Rough concrete to the right, a vibrating refrigerator on the left, a harsh white light overhead, and no room to pretend everything was under control. In the corner of the convex mirror, a man in a reflective vest raised his open hand, palm down, asking for calm. He had been there before I noticed. He didn't look like a warehouse employee. The vest was too clean, and he had no radio attached or badge hanging from it. He looked like a driver, relaxed posture, short steps. The perfect distance to fit in my mirror without having to be pressed against the loading dock. He signaled 2 centimeters to the right. 2 centimeters are nothing when you're on the road. In the dock, 2 centimeters change the angle of the rubber, change the pressure of the hydraulic arm, Change the story the yard tells about you. I stopped at the brake and moved forward half a meter to restart. The angle I had set was my standard, open enough to enter straight without scraping. His gesture insisted that I was outside the white line on the ground. The paint on the parking lot was too new. The lines shone under the light as if they had been made for an audit photo. Everything there seemed organized to prove that the fault is always the driver's. I retreated again. The second crack came sharper. The rubber bent crooked again, and I felt the trailer pulled to the side as if it were sliding into a position I hadn't chosen. The vest clenched its fist, signaling a stop, and then made a short gesture to go in further. I obeyed because it still seemed like normal assistance. Every trucker has guided someone into a tight loading dock, and nobody wants to be the guy who refuses help and leaves a mark on the dock. I restarted again. This time he moved behind my axis, near the air hoses and the electrical harness. It wasn't the usual position of someone who only guides with their hands. It was the position of someone observing a technical point where the cabin can't see and where the yard rarely looks. I pulled over slowly until I felt the weight settle. Silence. Brake applied. Engine idling. No warning lights on the dashboard. That's exactly how a good maneuver ends. I went downstairs. The early morning air was cold and heavy with diesel. The refrigerated truck next to it rattled in cycles, and the sound seemed to fill the empty spaces in the corridor. I walked to the back and saw the actual misalignment. The trailer was slightly offset to the right, centimeters. Enough for the dock rubber to compress more on one side than the other. Enough for someone to photograph it and call it a hazard. I went back along the side of the truck. The vest was no longer where I had last seen it. It was near the hoses, looking down as if checking something, unhurriedly, as if it were part of his job. He didn't touch me. He didn't call my attention. He just stood there in the exact spot where a small interference changes everything and leaves no obvious trace. I climbed into the cabin with the feeling that something had been moved silently. Before authorizing the unloading, I went down again to check the whole thing. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. In a crowded dock, anything out of the ordinary becomes an argument against you. The service hose was plugged in, but twisted out of place in my usual way. It wasn't loose. It was just out of place enough that under pressure, it would allow a short leak. The electrical plug seemed secure, but the rubber had a recent mark, as if someone had pulled and reattached it hastily, trying to make it too perfect to be noticed. I adjusted everything manually, applied a light force to feel resistance, checked the latches, checked again. The panel remained normal. The warehouse side door opened, and the supervisor signaled to begin the procedure. The hydraulic arm moved toward the trailer floor. I stood beside the unit, my eyes fixed on the rubber and the white line, trying to ensure that any mistakes from then on wouldn't be mine. When the arm touched it, the hissing sound came. Short, sharp, unmistakable. Pressure escaping for a second before stabilizing. The supervisor immediately halted the operation. 2 employees appeared with flashlights and clipboards. One pointed to the rubber dock, where the compression was uneven. The other pointed to the deviation in the white line on the floor. The sequence seemed rehearsed. The flashlight searched for exactly what it needed to find. They ordered me to unhitch and back up for side inspection. The cargo was held until verification. My trailer became a stationary object under a white light, with the license plate number noted, the time recorded, and the dock code linked. An employee stuck a label with a code on my bumper and took a picture. Another photographed the bent rubber as if it were central evidence. The dock also became evidence. I was directed to a bay outside the flow of traffic. Cone behind the wheels, yellow line on the ground. A simple seal on the release paper. It didn't physically restrain anything, but it restrained the narrative. During the inspection, they measured the trailer's height, air pressure, fifth wheel level, alignment, and repeated procedures, as if searching for a fault that would justify the squeaking noise. Everything was within acceptable limits. The problem was that acceptable doesn't erase the sound they heard, nor does it erase the mark on the rubber. In a yard like that, a second of squeaking becomes an incident report. My name entered the client's internal system as an operational event. This isn't yelling. This isn't a reprimand. It's worse because it becomes part of the record. The company's app updated automatically with a status indicating mandatory review. Then came another automatic notification. Priority suspended for that client for 30 days. This means that if I went back there, I would be at the end of the queue, with more supervision, more wasted time, and a greater chance of another detail becoming evidence. While I waited, the machinery kept turning without me. Trucks came in, pulled up, and left. No one seemed to notice my trailer stuck in the corner. The yard doesn't stop because of one driver. The yard just registers. I observed the dock corridor from afar. Another truck pulled into the same narrow space. Same situation. Same cold light. Same bright white line. And the reflective vest reappeared. Same posture. Same distance from the convex mirror. Same open hand asking for calm. The driver inside the cabin obeyed, because obeying is easier than being suspicious, and because in that environment, social trust seems like a rule of the road, not a risk. The vest signaled a slight adjustment to the right, then another. The rear of the trailer began to drift off-center without the mirror noticing. I saw the dock rubber begin to bend crookedly before final contact, just like mine had. I saw the vest move behind the axle of the other truck, near the hoses, exactly as it had done to me. Nothing there seemed improvised. When they finally released my load, it was too late to meet my next shift. The warehouse put me at the end of the flow. Other trucks that arrived later passed me. Every minute I was stopped increased the weight of the event on my day, and every minute increased the chance of me making a real mistake, the kind that doesn't require a safety vest to happen. After unloading came the second stage of the aftermath, the one that makes no noise. I was directed to a post-incident check at the gate. Another signature, another record, another note associated with my name and my trailer. The system needed consistency, and consistency is built with paper and screen. The company dispatcher informed me that the next pickup had been postponed pending the completion of an internal review. They didn't call it a suspension, but that's what it was in practice. My status on the app was restricted for a few hours. This meant I couldn't automatically accept new routes. I needed clearance. And clearance takes time, because nobody is in a hurry when the cost is borne by the driver. I spent the rest of the early morning in a brightly lit parking lot outside the courtyard, watching automated messages appear as if they were neutral, awaiting analysis, event under validation, history temporarily blocked. Each line seemed like bureaucracy, but together they formed a wall. As the sky began to lighten, I returned to the gate to leave for good. The yard was already receiving trucks from the morning shift. The discipline was the same. The lines shone just the same. The rhythm was the same. The ease of transforming centimeters into evidence was the same. I slowed down as I drove through the dock corridor. The hydraulic arm was already fitted to another trailer. The rubber was compressed, symmetrical as it should be. Further ahead, at the exact spot where my mirror had captured the first gesture of the night, the same reflective vest was signaling to another driver to widen the angle. Behind him, 2 employees watched with the same calm with which they had observed my wheezing. I didn't honk. I just passed by,